This morning's scripture reading is from Luke 19, 10 through 19. It says, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. As they heard these things, he proceeded to tell a parable, because he was near Jerusalem, and because they supposed that the kingdom of God was to appear immediately. He said, therefore, a nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and then return. Calling 10 of his servants, he gave them 10 minas, and said to them, engage in business until I come. But his citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him, saying, we do not want this man to reign over us. When he returned, having received the kingdom, he ordered these servants to whom he had given the money to be called to him, that he might know what they had gained by doing business. The first came before him, saying, Lord, your mina has made 10 minas more. And he said to him, well done, good servant, because you have been faithful in very little, you shall have authority over 10 cities. And the second came, saying, Lord, your mina has made 5 minas. And he said to him, and you are to be over 5 cities.
Pert near forgot to turn on the microphone. Good morning, everybody. I tell you what, when Troy said, I know he's being facetious. We all know he was being facetious. But when he said, you're going to love him, I know that's not true. Because I know you already do. I tell you what, church, I have been very encouraged by these past couple of months in a number of different ways. I'm a blessed man. I am a blessed man. If I could call your attention to your bulletins real quick before we begin our actual sermon today. Visitors, I apologize. A little bit of a homecoming that you're dealing with this morning. So for any who are tuning in or for any of you who are here today, well, you don't get to hear the normal guy who's here preaching. He's a better preacher than I am. So sorry about that, first of all. But you also get to hear me be a little mushy-gushy with these folks. So just be prepared for that. If you look in that bulletin there, you don't have to necessarily read it through right now, but there are a couple of points in there that you'll notice that I'm going to kind of refer to. First of all is the singing. Let me tell you, I am very glad to be here at Margaret Street, where there are some roughly 200 voices all singing out, and that is a wonderful blessing to get to be a part of today. But I'll tell you, that little congregation of roughly 17 members, they put out some music. I'll just put that to you plainly. The Lord definitely gets a bit of a sweet aroma, and it's even sweet to our own ears while we're there. In fact, that congregation is very good in terms of their singing. There are more basses than there are tenors. So I've actually, for those visitors here, for the folks who know me, they know that I tend to like to sing bass. And I don't do that a whole lot at New Hope relative to normal. So I sing a little bit more tenor. So if I sound a little off key today, that's part of the reason. There have been 2 major developments by the time that I sent that little update to everybody. And I want to draw those things to you now, because I know you want to know how the work's going on there. I imagine you probably want to know how I'm doing. I'm doing great. You want to learn how that specifically relates to me, you could ask me afterwards. But I want to tell you about 2 things that have happened since that bulletin got sent out. Later that week, I think I sent that on a Sunday or Monday, whenever it was, that following Wednesday, we're now going, we decided, because we're teaching our Genesis class on Wednesday, you'll see that in the bulletin. Because we're teaching Genesis class, we've gone through the ark and the flood and so forth. But we didn't really get to spend much time talking about the effects of the flood beyond what the Bible's purpose is in bringing that up, and that is the destruction of the world and the salvation of Noah and his family. And of course, all the animals and plants and so forth. Because we couldn't talk about the flood itself, we're actually having a seminar this coming Thursday evening, which I guess you're invited to, but that's a bit of a drive for just some seminar. You're welcome to come. I'm sure the congregation would be encouraged by that, but really no pressure. But we get to have a seminar, and that's kind of at the request of the congregation. I informed them that that's something I like to talk about, and they wanted to hear it. So hopefully, not only will we have that extra thing where we get to learn a little bit more about some science and so forth, and how that really impacts our relationship with God and His impact on the world, but there may also be a fair bit of the community that gets to attend that as well. So we're pretty excited about that. But the thing I'm most excited about, and that you will want to know most assuredly, is the work is taking hold. While there are no baptisms or even restorations at this point to report to you, I can tell you that for the members who are there who were strong to begin with, there's one of the classes we're going through, another one called Know Your Why. You might recall that. You might have attended a few of those classes last year when Casey and I co-taught it together. And it was very clear that after we talked about prayer in this particular class up there in Mississippi, it was very clear that one of the men, with all of the men there have tender hearts, but this one demonstrated it, this particular individual, by praying more earnestly and fervently in front of the congregation, the likes of which I hadn't heard him pray before. Not that his prayers before were any lesser, but it's clear that they want the word to take root in them. He took what was taught in class and applied it to his life in a way that is clearly demonstrated before all of us. I can only imagine what happens in their own home. So please continue praying for the work there, because your prayers are working and the support you've given is working. Go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 19. Go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 19. One of the great ideas my mother gave me several years ago, and as I was starting the whole Bear Valley process and becoming a minister, she was saying, "Hey, Trevor, I would love if you taught one of these days, or gave this idea to someone else, if we spent more time talking about those classic Bible stories we talk with our children about, right?" And in chapter 19, there's one of those classic Bible stories in the first several verses of the text. That's Zacchaeus, right? This little man who's really excited to see Jesus, and he has a hard time getting to see because if he's of short stature, the text says, and so he climbs up in a sycamore tree, and Jesus comes up and says, "Well, get on down, I'm going to your house." And we talk about all that. It's a wonderful story. It's a wonderful story, and it's very encouraging to teach our kids this, particularly because, generally speaking, the kids are of short stature too. Except, of course, since I've been gone, there are a few who were of little stature, now they're not so little stature no more. 3 months, it's incredible. But the thing my mother encouraged about teaching those Bible classes that we teach as children is because there tends to be much more going on in the text than simply why it might relate to the little ones. Noah's Ark, we talk about the boat and we talk about the animals. There's some pretty adult themes going on when it comes to that story. And that definitely is the case here in chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. In fact, there are a number of themes here that we're going to look throughout the Gospel of Luke. I have to give credit to a local minister over there in Amory. His name is Jonathan Godsey. He and I basically preached the same exact sermon, and I listened to his, and his was better, and I took some points from him. So we're going to adjust that to him. So Jonathan, if you ever happen to see this, thanks, buddy, for your help. I appreciate that. Let's begin just by reading chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. And we'll get to our points today. He entered Jericho and was passing through. And there was a man called by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. Zacchaeus was trying to see who Jesus was and was unable to see because of the crowd, for he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree in order to see him, for he was about to pass through that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for today I must stay at your house." And he hurried and came down and received him gladly. When they saw it, that is, the crowd, they all began to grumble, saying, "He is gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, half of my possessions I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will give back 4 times as much." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which is lost." Was lost. That classic story that we're so familiar with telling our little ones has one of the core themes, really has several important themes, but the core theme of the Gospel of Luke, talking about the Son of Man who comes to seek that which was lost. That which was lost. Our Lord is a seeker of the lost. And that has a whole lot of implications about it. So we're going to look at that today in the minutes that we have together remaining. To answer, or to start looking at this concept of our God who is a seeker of the lost, we need to first establish what it means to be lost, right? I think it's probably a pretty natural thought. We'll say someone who's stuck in sin, someone who's living in sin, someone who hasn't repented, and someone who hasn't obeyed the gospel. Okay, yeah, that's true. If we were to go through practically any book of the Bible, we could basically see that. But it's very interesting because Luke, as he writes his gospel, he informs us really what it means, that which Jesus is seeking for. We might say the lost. But let's go backwards a couple chapters, okay? Let's go look in Luke chapter 17. Luke chapter 17. You might flip a page or two back. Luke chapter 17, starting at about verse 22, which is going to begin the context of this next little section we're going to talk about. It's talking about something that's not directly related. Let me explain. What's going on here? Starting in chapter 17, verse 22, Jesus is talking a bit about being prepared and so forth. And for my subheading says the second coming foretold. I think it's the destruction of Jerusalem that we're looking at here that he's talking about. He's talking about that, and you need to be really prepared for that. He begins and he says to the disciples in verse 22, "The days will come when you will long to see one of the days of the Son of Man, and you will look and not see it. They will say to you, 'Look there, look here, do not go away, and do not run after them, for just like the lightning, when it comes out of one part of the sky, it shines to the other part of the sky, so will the Son of Man be in his day. But first, he must suffer many things and be rejected by this generation.'" So that's what the context is here. But start paying attention particularly here in verses 26 through 29. "And just as it happened in the days of Noah, so it will also be in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were being given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. It was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating, they were drinking, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, they were building. But on the day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained down fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all." Okay, Trevor, yeah, we're talking about the lost here, right? We're talking about the sin, and we definitely know the wickedness that's going on in these texts. What does any of that have to do with the coming destruction of Jerusalem? What does that have anything to do with the Son of Man seeking the lost? Well, if you were to go back to chapter 19, there in verse 10 where it says, "The Son of Man came to seek and save the lost," this is where the English translators, in their efforts to help us understand what's going on, maybe slowed us down a little bit, because the exact same word in the Greek, in a slightly different form, because that's just how you and I talk in different ways. And if I say you, I might be meaning you, Troy, or I might mean you all, right? If I say you, it's the same word, just in a slightly different form in verses 27 and 29 of Luke chapter 17. You want to take a guess what word that is? Destroyed. This is where things start to really come to a head as we begin to understand what it means that the Son of Man came to seek and save. This word in the Greek, while it can be rightly translated lost, in the sense, but not lost in the sense of, they're aimless and they don't know where they're going, like maybe for those of us who don't like to look to the GPS for directions. I still have that problem. It's not that kind of loss. It's when you lose something of great value, like loss in a fire, right? If your home burns down, you experience loss. Over there towards where I'm at there in Mississippi, there's I traded hurricanes for tornadoes is what I ended up doing. So over there in Mississippi, not far from there in Amory, is a town called Smithville. And several years ago, I forget how many, I think it was like 3 or 4, not long, there was utter destruction caused by a tornado. Loss. That's what this word means, in the same sense that it could also be translated destroyed. If you think of it as ruined, then we can begin to understand things a little bit more clearly. Destroyed, not in the sense that it can't be fixed. Lost, not in the sense that it can't be restored. It's just ruined. Something is ruined. It can be fixed. But boy, howdy, it's going to take a whole lot of effort on someone who knows how to fix them. And only the Son of Man knows how to fix a ruined soul. And if you think particularly what caused the Sodom and Gomorrah, what caused the world to be destroyed, and that is clearly the wickedness of the world. All right, now we're getting some traction here. As those towns were destroyed, as the world was destroyed for its sin, ruined for its sin and wickedness, and then later on, Luke uses the same word to describe what Christ has to say about what he wants to do with people, that begins to shed some light on the kinds of people that Jesus is willing to come for, that he was willing to come for. So now let's keep working our way back through the text. Let's look at a couple of other places where we have someone represented that might fall under this category of lost. Let's go back, say to chapter 15. That's a familiar passage, right? You may not know Luke 15 off the top of your head, but I'm willing to bet you've heard the phrase prodigal son, right? That's where the prodigal son is at. This is a parable. This is in a series of 3 parables that Jesus is teaching to, well, really it seems like he's directing it to the Pharisees, as Luke 15:1 describes. But let's just look at a few verses here. Let's start and say verse 17. Luke chapter 15, verse 17. That particular parable starts in 11, but let's zip down here. Verse 17 of Luke 15 says, "But when he came to his senses, he said," this is the prodigal son, so to speak, or the lost son, as you might otherwise say, "How many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I am dying with hunger?" He's reflecting on the absolute wastefulness that he's had with all of the inheritance and so forth that he received just a few verses before, that he demanded of his father, unlike his older brother. We'll get to him later. Verse 18, "I will get up and I will go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men." And so he got up and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him and ran and embraced and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Just like he said that he would tell his father. Verse 22, "But the father said to his slaves, Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found." And they began to celebrate. You want to take a guess what that word lost means in the Greek? It's our same ruined word. That won't happen, that particular word won't show up in the next little story. But here we go. This notion of someone who is lost, this ruined person, this individual who, if you were to go and read the whole parable, we won't do that quite today, but if you were to read that whole text, and you ought to, you'd find that he wasted his father's inheritance. He demanded the inheritance of his dad. Give that to me now. And when do you typically get an inheritance? It's after whoever is offering that to you passes away. He goes and takes off, and he spends it ridiculously and blows it all away. Later on, his older brother in verse 30 will talk about how he totally wasted his wealth, particularly on prostitutes and so forth. He was being a fool and indulging in horrible activities, wicked activities, and leading up to a point that if we go back to Luke 17, right, remember this word destroyed, ruined as described the world, Sodom and Gomorrah, he could have fallen along those lines. Certainly anybody who is lost is along those lines. And that's what we see here. Let's think of another one. My personal favorite, not that that really adds any value to it, but just a fun little fact about Trevor in case you care. Luke chapter 7, Jump back there a few passages. Luke chapter 7. So like I said, you won't really see this word ruined, destroyed, lost. You won't really see that in this text, but we've talked about how the sinfulness, the wickedness of somebody, their sin, brings them closer to that destruction, brings them along those lines. And we have an example of such a person in this chapter. Frankly, there are multiple, but it's really highlighted here. Let's go ahead and jump forward all the way up to verse 44. You might need to flip. Chapter 7 of Luke in verse 44 begins, turning towards the woman, Jesus, he said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I entered your house, and you gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but since the time I came in, she's not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she anointed my feet with perfume. For this reason I say to you, her sins, which are many, have been forgiven, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little." And then he said to her, "Your sins have been forgiven." Those who were reclining at the table began to say to themselves, "Who is this man who even forgives sins?" And he said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." This woman, if you go back, that particular story begins back in verse 36. There's more of a conversation that they have. We have this woman who comes to Jesus, anoints his feet with perfume, and she's crying and weeping. She's drying his feet with her hair. An inconceivable amount of pain that she is dealing with. And then the Pharisee who owns the home, his name is Simon, he says, surely he knows this woman's a sinner. These are the sorts of people that are lost. These are the sorts of people, the ones who have so many sins to be forgiven, the ones who recklessly do things without any consideration for what might happen and eventually find themselves trying to eat what the pigs would eat. By the way, that's a Jewish parable, meaning someone who is so hard on their luck, who's so down on their life, not their luck, it was their own actions that brought it about to them, that they want to eat after pigs, which are filthy animals to the Jew. Little sobering context there. And then, of course, our friend Zacchaeus back in chapter 19. You might be familiar with how the Jews felt about Gentiles and tax collectors, right? They didn't care for them. Not at all. Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector. He was the guy who said, this is how much money we need from all of these people. The other tax collectors, they're saying, this is what you owe, based on what we have been told you owe. It was his place. However, he interacted with the Romans and how they informed him of the taxes, because that's where the money was really going, was to the Roman Empire at the time. But essentially, he was like, this is how much we're going to expect of everybody. A very easy place to defraud folks. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands. I guess I didn't really look into that enough, but you get the point. These are the kinds of people that the Son of Man came to save. And did you see the interactions between Jesus and the lost in these stories? What did Jesus say about the woman? Sorry, flipped too far. What did Jesus say to her? She loves much because she's been forgiven much. He said to her in verse 48, your sins have been forgiven. Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. This woman who is weeping, because she knows what she's done? You telling me I get to have peace from you, Lord? What about the man in the parable? He's not necessarily a real man. He could be. But what does he do? He goes to his father. Says, he does what he says he's going to do. I'm not worthy to be called your son. It's almost like, look there back in verse 22. Right after the son says to his father, to his face, I'm not worthy to be called your son. The son said to his slaves, quickly bring out the best. He doesn't acknowledge him. Right? Doesn't even acknowledge him. I don't know if he cut him off, but it's clearly not the point. The point is, how does the father respond? Here's a fun fact for you. If you were to go through and count all of the words of Luke chapter 15, if you were to count all of the words that showed up the most, the second most common word is the word found. Which is why this word we've been talking about, ruined, destroyed, can also be translated lost. That's a right translation. Jesus is making a bit of a play on words here, if you will. Found is the second most common word. You know what the most common word in that text is? It's Father. And then, of course, we have Zacchaeus. Jesus says, come on down. Just come on down. I need to go to your house today. And how does Zacchaeus respond? We don't know if there's any conversation that happens between him coming down out of the tree, him going to the home, and whatnot. But there's no words from Christ between verses 5 and 8. And what does Zacchaeus do? He says, I will give half my possessions to the poor. If I've defrauded anyone of anything, I will give back 4 times as much. That's actually in keeping with the law. Exodus chapter 11, I think it is, and Leviticus chapter 6. I can correct that for you if I mistakenly pointed those out. It's actually in keeping with the law, though. But he was eager to do it. He was eager to abide in all of these things. These are the kinds of people, again, who had much sin, who spent all of their money on prostitutes, who embezzled and took their money from his brothers, from out of the mouths of families. There are probably people who starved because of all of his fraud. We don't know that, okay? We don't know that for sure. But certainly he's not saying if, he's saying since I have defrauded these people. Certainly he's taken advantage where he ought not to have before. These are the people that the Son came to save. And that's wonderful, right? And there's no surprise there, right? You know, what we've been talking about so far this morning is pretty consistent with what we already know about Jesus. He came to seek and save the lost. It sounds real nice. It's a very familiar passage. Did you notice in those 3 passages that we looked at, there was a third party involved in each one? Did you notice that? For Zacchaeus, there was a grumbling crowd. For the prodigal son, there was his embittered older brother. For Luke chapter 7, there were a number of people there, but the real focus, it seemed, was on Simon the Pharisee. And this is just Trevor's opinion. I personally don't think that Simon the Pharisee was being as vindictive as Pharisees tended to be in that moment. I think it was coming from an honest place of confusion. I don't think he understood what was going on. I can explain my reasoning for that if you're interested in that. There's another account where this man, Simon, shows up in one of the other Gospels that fills us in on that, I think. whether he was just confused or he was vindictive about it, he certainly did not have a good comprehension of what was going on, that the Son of Man might be willing to save this woman that he knew to be a sinner. Each of those accounts, and we could find several others here in the Gospel of Luke, where we have people looking down on some group or individual for the way they have behaved in their lives prior. And I wonder, how do we compare? Are we more like the Son of Man who's been out there actively trying to make connections with those folks? Or are we like the grumbling crowd, or the disgruntled older brother, or the confused or vindictive Simon the Pharisee? How would we respond? How would we respond if, say, a known alcoholic to the community, not a former member of the congregation, but an actual member of the community who's so well known simply because of his or her struggle with drugs, if they walked in the door, how would we feel about them? What about someone who walks in the door covered in vulgar tattoos? Or they knock on your door saying, "Hey, I know I don't look normal, but I heard you're a Christian. I heard you could connect me to Jesus." What about a clearly practicing homosexual? What if they entered into your life somehow? How would you respond? If they said, "Hey, I heard a little bit about this Bible thing, and a friend of a friend told me that you were a Christian," would we be the disgruntled older brother, the grumbling crowd, or the confused or vindictive Simon the Pharisee? What about a brother or sister who has wronged us specifically, who has directly impacted you and your family, and they ask for forgiveness? How would we respond? How would you respond? How would I respond? Think about that as each individual, because this word is talking to not us as a group, not only that anyway, as individuals. How would we respond? Would we be like those other three that we ought not to be, in case it's unclear, but instead like the Son of Man who came to seek and save the lost? Make no mistake, Luke is talking about the glorification of the Son of Man. In all of those passages, he is talking about the glory of Jesus. But if you and I are supposed to be imitators of Paul, who is an imitator of Christ, then we best pay attention to how Jesus is acting in those moments. Clearly, we need to have our mindset on those things. Maybe that's something that's hard for you. Put yourself in their shoes. When's the last time that you did something wrong to someone and you paid fourfold without being told to do anything? When's the last time you did that? I understand Zacchaeus was obeying the law and when he was doing that. But when's the last time you went out of your way to give to others because you did wrong? When's the last time you were willing to forego everything that made you who you were prior to wronging someone else? Say, "Hey, I'm not worthy to be called your friend or your brother. I just want forgiveness or help or something. You'll never hear from me again." When's the last time it's happened to you? Put yourself in their shoes. When's the last time you wept for your sin? Because I promise you, all of the sin that woman was feeling, Simon the Pharisee should have been responding in a similar way. Maybe she was guilty of more sins, but as we rightly discussed earlier with Troy here in the Psalm class, that ultimately every sin that we commit is against God. And if every one of the sins we commit makes us worthy of death, the wages of sin is death, every sin we commit ought to bring us that sense of guilt. I'm not trying to shame anybody. That's not where the focus should be. The point is the Son of Man came to save the lost. That includes all of those folks that we might otherwise be disgruntled about. And at one point, that included everybody in this room. We have to keep this mindset, this understanding that the lost of this world need Jesus too. He's not just somebody we come to church to talk about, come to this building to talk about. The world needs Him. And everybody in here knows someone who's lost. Maybe today, maybe you're the lost person. There are lots of faces, I am pleased to say, that I don't recognize, which means you are coming to this congregation for the first time, at least in a year. There might have been a day where I didn't happen to be in town and you came to visit. Okay, fair enough. But I've not seen you since January. So if you're here, that means you want to know more about this Jesus who can save you. And if that is the case, we can help you. The Lord wants us to help you. Maybe you're only at the stage where you still need to learn more about Him to determine whether or not you actually believe in Him. That's fine, because belief in Him is crucial. Faith in Jesus is crucial. We'll help you with that. Maybe you're there. Maybe you're ready to say, yes, I've got faith in Him, and I'm ready to confess that before everybody. I'm ready to get rid of all of those sins of my past and turn away from them, and I'm ready to be buried in the waters of baptism so that I might enter into Christ. We can help you with that too. Or maybe you're already a brother or sister. Maybe you are struggling to rightly handle someone who is lost. Maybe you're on your way to becoming lost again yourself. And you need the prayers of the church. Here in a moment, we're going to have what's called an invitation. That invitation is an actual invitation to come down one of these aisleways here, to come forward where you will be met with people who care about you and will help you in your need. Please, will you not come and let Jesus find you? Answer His call as He searches for you. Whether that is because you need to be joined to the family or you need a correction in your life. I don't know what your needs are, but the Lord does. Please let us know as together we stand and sing.